History is part of the DNA of our company. It's part of who we are.
Digging a hole and finding an object at the bottom of it is digging a hole and finding an object at the bottom of it. Digging a hole archaeologically, recording it archaeologically, observing it archaeologically tells you how that object came to be there, why that object's there, and all sorts of other interesting things as well, perhaps about the other objects that the JCB has cut through while you're going. We decided that we'd adopt a kind of a public persona, and that was really the crime police procedural, a CSI Yangon, if you like. And the first thing we set about doing was objectively understanding our scene of crime, if you like. And so that's the beginning of a long period, particularly working in the National Archive at Kew. I'm showing you that to give you the impression that we're starting to build up layers in the landscape. Just by looking at the photographs and maps and plans and so on that goes with this information, we've got a lot of things going on in a relatively small area of landscape, and we're trying to understand those, because if we are going to take this forward to field work, then we need to know what those things are and where they are, because they're likely to turn up in some form or other in the archaeological record. The Royal Air Force required an opportunity, a motive, and the means to do it. The opportunity certainly existed. The British moved back into Rangoon, occupied Rangoon in early May 1945, and in fact, the first Allied personnel into Rangoon was a Mosquitoes crew that landed at Mingladon, which had been deserted by the Japanese. From that moment on, it was an RAF airfield again, and it remained an RAF airfield through until the end of British colonial rule. The motive is a different matter. That's the motive. Here it says, the aircraft scrap, we can assume again, therefore, that they're being dismantled again, was put to good account. Local cottage industries are making cooking utensils and many other articles which were in short supply in Burma. This reminds you of something. There it is. But in Burma in 1945, it's not the Spitfire appeal, and it's not swords into ploughshares, it's warplanes into WOKS. In fact, it would have been impossible to bury crated Spitfires at RAF Mingladon in the first place, because no Spitfires were delivered to Mingladon and Rangoon between the fall of Rangoon in May 1945 and the end of British rule. What about the witnesses? And a lot has been said about witnesses in this particular story. The witness material is extremely problematic. We were given statements which were uncontextualized. There was evidence of leading questioning. There was some statements that witnesses were believed simply because they said they were veterans from a particular unit or whatever. The most famous case, the most high-profile case, is probably the instance of the American Seabees, the members of the American construction battalions who were interviewed in Florida, who were allegedly involved in burying material at Mingladon. And in fact, in all of the documentation, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that any significant numbers of American personnel, let alone Seabees with their equipment, were transiting through Rangoon at that time, as the legend alleges. And that material simply has to be discounted. Wargaming, again, I think to their absolute credit, backed us on this. They said they wanted the best possible practice. They wanted something that was professional, ethical, and produced good science, good data, and would be published, which is one of the reasons we're all standing here talking to you tonight.
To undertake any form of conflict archaeology where there has actually been armed conflict in a modern industrial world without EOD cover is both foolhardy and, I dare say, stupid. You are asking for trouble, because if you think you'll never find it, I guarantee you will. Everything was dropped on here. They go as small as £30, they go as large as £1,000. One of the other hazards, it is not a hazard, but it is human remains. It is not a hazard because we are very capable and very competent and able to deal with human remains. We will dig them forensically, and we will give them the best possible chance for identification and recognition.
EM method, or indeed any other geophysical method, is not a Spitfire detector. That particular piece of equipment, yeah, it's a metal detector, detects electrical conductivity variations. So, yes, it might rather wonderfully be a Spitfire in a crate, and this superb model was made by Martin Brown's colleagues at White Young Green.
There's some compelling evidence that the ground in this area has been disturbed. So, unfortunately, I don't think we're comparing like with like. But over here, what are these two anomalies about? Well, this one here, we know what this is because there's around this area, there are some very large runway landing lights. And undoubtedly there are large high voltage cables associated with those. Again, part of the risk assessment. We don't want to dig through these high voltage cables. But we think that these anomalies, this strip of anomalies here are related to those cables. However, this one is more interesting because just here, there's a little patch of exposed concrete that has steel reinforcements in it. And we think that this is part of the old infrastructure from 1945, certainly from Second World War times. Our recommendation was that the EM survey and resistivity data suggest the 2004 survey site is disturbed, but we should still investigate that old anomaly to answer the question. Combined with the aerial photos, the 2013 data suggests that this oblique anomaly, that big black strip that I showed you in the EM data, is old infrastructure, and it could be used to locate the prone road. And if we just pull up the EM map from here, that means that we're scheduling test trenches and test excavations over our old over our old test site here. And also we opened a series of slots and trenches based around this oblique anomaly that, again, as I say, might tie up with the location of Prome Road.
One of the exciting things about being approached by Wargaming to be part of this project was that for 10 years I had people ringing me up, or when I was visiting their site, bending my ear and saying, oh, if you go and look over there, you'll find the, delete as applicable, Harley-Davidsons, Spitfires, etc., etc. Kubelwagens at Lügerschul's my favourite. My role was not so much, like everybody else, to dig up Spitfires. It was to continue the CSI analogy, to be the crime scene manager, or the SOCO, the scene of crime officer. My role was not to say, dig here, that this is the good stuff is here. It was to work with everyone else to decide where we dug, and then to report, record and interpret the remains. The site was blessed. The snakes were conjoined not to bother us, and didn't. And this was important cultural ritual being undertaken by our key partners. When we were able to dig, and thanks to JCB for the magnificent kit that they gave us, for those of you who are thinking, here's an archaeologist, he's going to talk about teaspoons. Not this one. You can do an awful lot of work with one of those. Positions for trenching were agreed collaboratively. It was very important we had buy-in from everybody on site, whether that was the airport manager, the STP site manager, who was an absolute star, geophysics, David as project initiator, and myself as archaeologist, and Manny, our machine driver. But that's basically what's going on there. And you can see Rod doing close protection, if you will, by monitoring the strip for any remains that are coming up, but also keeping a close eye in case there's anything that looks unpleasant and that we need to be careful of. When we did dig, this is in the area that Adam was just talking about, the area that he had surveyed originally, and then the resurvey was a little bit problematic. And this is why. What you can see is a good 2 meters of disturbed earth coming down onto a blue clay. The blue clay is where we stopped. It hadn't been disturbed. That blue clay is geological. That's been there for some thousands of years. There is nothing beneath it of interest to anyone looking at the mid-20th century, unless they've tunnelled in, but there is certainly nothing dug into that. It also, as you heard, creates problems because of the water table. This area had been significantly disturbed. However, within it there were archaeological artefacts. This is a major piece of structural timber. The guys are in there for useful scale. This is not a piece of fence post, it's not a piece of bracing from a crate or anything. It's a big bit of wood. There were several of these unearthed on the site. And there's one with all the scales in place, and you can see the carpentry marks, the mortise holes. If we were working on a medieval site, we might be expecting to haul that sort of thing out of the ditch or the moat as being bits of either building or bridge abutment. And I think what we're looking at here is one of the structures that appear and then disappear from the photographs that you saw back at the beginning. Our long trench across the new survey was interesting in many ways. That's a dirt track. Doesn't look a lot, but there is your dirt track. It's on the right alignment to be one of, if not the road, the famous Prome Road. I suspect there's some track variance as in the monsoon and things, so it's part of it. It's the same sort of dirt track that we drove on the day that we had a day out and went out up country. What's really interesting about it happens over here. That might not look a lot to you. I'll grant you that. There's a feature here. There's the blue clay coming in, and it stops just on the clay. Very clever, this. Road's just there. There's one of those bits of brick and the road surface. I initially looked at this, and it's a roadside ditch, but nothing terribly unusual about finding a ditch along the side of a road anywhere in the world. And then when I started to look at it more closely, as we were doing the drawings, you start to see that there are discrete blobs, technical term, of soils. These blobs are about that big, about that wide, and about that deep. And they are consistent with something that I've seen in Britain and in France and in Belgium. And they're sandbags. They're full sandbags that when you're clearing up your site, well, there's an awful lot of ways that you could fill that hole in, but actually the lazy squaddy way is to kick the full sandbags back into the hole. Extensive ethnographic research with squaddies has told me that this is exactly what you do if you can get away with it. So why have we got a sandbag-filled roadside ditch? I would refer you to Mr. Scott's evidence about the bombing. Whether you are British garrison driving up and down the road across the end of the runway, or Japanese, the chances of being caught out in the open, in your truck, by a visiting enemy aircraft are not a pleasant prospect. Having something you can jump down into that will provide some shelter makes the day at least a little bit better. That's interpretation 1. Interpretation 2 was also referred to by Rod. Rudimentary airfield close defence, you go to somewhere like Biggin Hill and you've got your pillboxes and your battle headquarters and all those lovely things. Out here, if you haven't got that, actually having a roadside ditch that you can turn into some sort of fire trench is better than nothing. And frankly, if someone starts shooting at you, better than nothing really is better than nothing. So we have our conflict archaeology. It's not big, it's not sexy, but I was really pleased we saw it. Because actually what we were there to do was, yes, if we'd been able to stand here and I'd been able to show you pictures of rusty things in boxes, that would have been fab. Yes, one of the reasons I went was hoping that we could do that. But the real reason for going is to take a really good story and set it in its landscape, look at its landscape. See the palimpsest, that sense of landscape where a modern 21st century landscape has the bits of the previous centuries sticking up through it. How the road is still there, how the fire trench tells you a little story that's never going to be in anybody's memoirs. You know, filled a load of sandbags and put them by the side of the road. It's not the sort of thing that makes a bestseller. These little moments tell us, one, what happened to Adam's results. They tell us, two, what some of the timbers may have been that were encountered. Yep, they're structural. But three, our evidence also tells us something about the experience of all those people on both sides who were there. And I think that's the point at which I'm going to shut up. But by paying tribute to wargaming and to David, between them, having the vision to do something beyond a treasure hunt for some Spitfires.
So the evidence-based case that we have is that while the opportunity existed for the RAF to bury aircraft at what was then RAF Mingledon, now Yangon International, the means and the motive just doesn't exist. The technical difficulties, the shortage of labour, the shortage of timber, the shortage of heavy equipment, not to mention the physical difficulties of that site that you've seen with the work that Martin and Adam have described, it makes it physically virtually impossible that this could have happened. There's ample evidence to the contrary, in fact, that Spitfires and other aircraft, many, many hundreds even of other aircraft, are disposed of in ways that are attested all over the world as the fighting powers demobilise and get rid of surplus equipment, worn-out equipment, and so on. It's scrapped, junked, left to one side to rot, whatever. You certainly don't waste your time and resources digging very large holes to put the things in, when in fact the quickest and most fun way of getting rid of an aircraft is what they did in India in some cases, which was get a crane and drop a concrete block on the tail. There's other ways of doing it as well. Or you just scrap the thing and sell it, as you saw, sell it to the local scrap dealers to turn into pots and pans. We can also say that the archaeological evidence that Martin's described entirely backs up the documentary work that we did, the desktop assessment, and I think certainly we can say that, to use a legal analogy again, beyond reasonable doubt, there are no buried Spitfires on RAF Mingledon, and by extension, we believe, on any of the other sites that have been mentioned in Burma. It just does not stack up. A final comment from Ross and Anderson about belief and people's abilities to maintain belief. They say, as you can see, belief can survive potent logical or even empirical challenges. They can survive and even be bolstered by evidence that most uncommitted observers would agree logically demands some weakening of such beliefs. They can even survive the total destruction of the original evidential basis. In other words, some people can find themselves in a psychological place, whether it's about the lone gunman or the Titanic wasn't the Titanic, or the astronaut, the moon landing happened in a film studio in California. That in spite of all the evidence, and in fact because people are challenging the evidence, it makes people more determined than ever to believe.
As Myanmar continues to open up to the possibilities of tourism and business with foreign partners, we hope our small part will inspire future projects which seek to explore the links between our various peoples and the people of Myanmar, which were forged in war and the struggle for independence, but which we can now explore together in a time of shared hope. With that hope goes the further hope that one day the families of veterans and military historians and enthusiasts will visit conflict sites of the forgotten war in Burma in the same way and the same numbers as visit the sites of conflict in northern France and Belgium, and that when they do, they will look, wonder, and remember, as we did, at the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery outside of Yangon. Our team believes that the true memory of that forgotten war is far more important than any single artifact from it, however iconic and valuable, because it is the memory which brings together people from all over the world in one of the most beautiful and vibrant nations of Southeast Asia. And that was our team that made this trip to Myanmar. So, thank you.